If you've ever been betrayed by someone who smiled to your face and stabbed you behind your back. If you've ever been made to feel small in a house you helped build. Then my story will sound painfully familiar. My name is Eleanor Ellis, and I lost my only son. But what came after his death hurt even more than grief. This is the story of how my daughter-in-law took everything from me. Until she learned the one truth she could never erase. I may have been quiet, but I was never weak. If you've ever fought silently for your dignity, stay with me until the end, because this isn't just a story about loss. It's about justice. The kind that speaks softly but hits hard. I still remember the smell of lilies that day. Heavy, sweet, and suffocating. The church pews were filled with familiar faces, all murmuring condolences that blurred together like background noise. My son, Daniel, lay in a coffin draped with white roses, the same flowers I used to plant with him every spring. He was only 34. My whole world wrapped in one man. My child, my pride, my reason to keep breathing. Gone because someone couldn't wait to get home from a bar. I stood there, holding onto the pew for balance as the pastor spoke about forgiveness and peace. But I wasn't thinking about heaven. I was thinking about her. Grace, Daniel's wife of 4 years. She was standing across the aisle, black dress perfectly fitted, hair smooth, makeup flawless, not a single tear smudged. People called it strength, called it performance. Grace didn't even glance at me during the entire service. She kept her head high, chin tilted, like the widow of some celebrity. Not a man who used to fix the porch swing at 7 a.m. and whistle off-key. After the funeral I went back to their home, our home really. I helped Daniel paint those walls. I bought the kitchen table myself as a wedding gift. Grace didn't protest when I moved in. In fact, she acted kind. She let me take the guest room, cooked us both tea, and even offered me a blanket that first night. But grief can hide truth, hers did. Over the next few weeks she started changing. The polite conversations turned into sharp remarks. She locked Daniel's study, saying it was too painful to open. She stopped eating meals with me. Then one morning I walked into the kitchen to find her at the table, flipping through documents. Insurance forms, bank statements, legal envelopes. Is that the life insurance policy? Yes. She didn't even look up. Yeah. There's a lot to figure out. Something about the tone, the coldness, made my stomach twist. That evening when I set 2 plates on the table, she didn't come. I found her on the porch, glass of wine in hand, staring at the stars like she owned them. Dinner's ready, I said softly. She turned, eyes glossy but hard. You don't have to do that, Eleanor. You don't have to play house anymore. Play house. She sighed, shaking her head. You don't need to cook or clean or whatever this is. Daniel's gone. It's time to move on. Her words hit like a slap. I swallowed back my tears. Grace. I lost him too. She smiled faintly, cruelly. Yes, but you had your life with him as a mother. I had him as a husband. You wouldn't understand. And then she walked away. Barefoot, holding her wine glass, her silhouette fading in the moonlight like a ghost with no soul. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the untouched food growing cold in front of me. I whispered to the empty chair across from me. She doesn't know me, Danny. She doesn't know who raised you. The next day I started packing my bags. When I left that house, Grace didn't come to the door. She didn't hug me, didn't thank me, didn't even look up from her phone. As I stepped outside, I heard her voice from behind me, soft but sharp enough to wound. You'll be fine, Eleanor. You always survive. I smiled sadly, tears burning my eyes. Yes, I whispered. That's what I do. The first few weeks after leaving Daniel's house felt like exile. I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, a pale little building tucked behind a laundromat. The kind of place that smells like detergent and broken dreams. The walls were thin, the heater moaned all night, and the only sound that kept me company was the hum of my old refrigerator. I told myself I'd stay busy. I volunteered at the church kitchen, baked bread for the neighbors, even started tending to the community garden just to feel alive again. But grief has its own clock. Doesn't move with yours. Sits in your chest and beats on its own time. Every morning I woke up expecting to hear Daniel's voice. His silly morning ma, echoing from the kitchen. And every morning, I remembered that the silence had taken him. One Sunday afternoon, I decided to visit his grave. I stopped by a florist on Main Street, the one he used to buy me tulips from every Mother's Day, and picked up a bunch of white lilies. As I reached the cemetery, I saw Grace there already. Dressed in expensive black, standing by his grave, phone in her hand, snapping pictures. My chest tightened. "Grace!" called gently. She turned, startled, but her surprise quickly turned to annoyance. "Oh, Eleanor. Didn't expect you." "I come every Sunday," I said softly. "I didn't know you did too." She gave a faint laugh, the kind people use when they don't mean it. "Well, I thought I should. People talk if I don't." People talk. That's why she was here. I wanted to scream, to tell her Daniel deserved more than this hollow show of affection. But I bit my tongue. "I brought lilies," I said, placing them beside the headstone. Grace tilted her head. "Lilies? I always thought he liked sunflowers." Froze. "No, he hated sunflowers. Said they always looked like they were eavesdropping on the sun." I shrugged. "Maybe you just didn't know him as well as I did." That one sentence was a knife. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked back toward my car, my vision blurry with tears. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard her voice again. Soft, deliberate. "You can stop coming, you know. He's not here anymore." That night, I cried harder than I had since the funeral. But somewhere in the middle of that storm of tears, something shifted. Grief turned into resolve. Pain into focus. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Grace had mistaken my silence for weakness. And that was her first mistake. A few days later, I went back to Daniel's house to collect the last of my belongings. Grace wasn't there, but her car, the new luxury sedan, was parked out front. I still had a spare key, though I wasn't sure if she'd changed the locks. The door opened easily. The house felt different. Cold. Me. The photos of Daniel and me that once lined the hallway were gone, replaced with abstract art and mirrors. In the living room, I noticed boxes labeled "Cell" stacked near the window. Curiosity tugged at me. I peeked into one. Daniel's childhood trophies, old photo albums, the wooden jewelry box I'd given Grace for their first anniversary. She was selling his memories. My heart sank. I sat on the floor, clutching one of the photo albums, flipping through the pages. Daniel at 10 years old with his missing front tooth. Daniel at prom in that ill-fitting suit. Daniel at graduation, hugging me so tightly I thought I'd never breathe again. And then, tucked between the pages, a folded note in his handwriting. My pulse quickened as I opened it. "Mom, if you ever find this, it means something happened. Don't worry, I've made sure you'll be okay. Mr. Lawrence knows everything. Talk to him, please. And Mom, don't trust everyone you think you can. Mr. Lawrence, his lawyer." The words made no sense at first. Why would Daniel hide this? What did he mean by "don't trust everyone"? My thoughts swirled as I drove straight to Mr. Lawrence's office the next morning. His secretary recognized me instantly and led me inside. He stood when I entered, looking somber. "Mrs. Ellis, I'm so sorry about your loss." "Thank you," I whispered. "But I need to ask, did Daniel leave anything with you for me?" He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, he did." From his desk drawer, he pulled out a sealed brown envelope with my name written in Daniel's neat handwriting. "He said to give this to you only if you asked," Mr. Lawrence said. "I wasn't sure you knew." My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a single line written on heavy paper. "Everything you built for me will come back to you, Mom. Trust the timing." That's all it said. But in those 8 words, I felt my son's presence. Calm, certain, guiding me again. Something was coming. And Grace had no idea what storm was about to hit her. I sat in my car outside Mr. Lawrence's office long after he handed me that envelope. The October wind rattled the leaves across the hood, and I just stared at Daniel's handwriting like it was a heartbeat from beyond the grave. "Everything you built for me will come back to you." The words looped in my head as I drove home through the fading light. Daniel had always been meticulous. He planned everything, even things I never thought he needed to. He used to joke that I was too trusting. "Mom," he'd say, "you see good in people who don't deserve it." And now, those words were coming back to haunt me. That night, I sat up with the letter under my lamp, running my fingers over every word, trying to find a hidden meaning. Trust the timing. What timing? My gaze drifted to the stack of old boxes I'd brought from Daniel's house. The top one was labeled Attic. Daniel's college years. I don't know what drew me to it, but I pulled the box closer and started unpacking. Books, files, a cracked frame of him and Grace smiling at their wedding. Underneath it all, taped to the bottom of the box, was another envelope. It was brittle with age, sealed with his initials. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were 2 things: a folded sheet of paper and a small silver flash drive. The note said, "Mom, if Grace ever turns on you, don't fight her head on. You won't win that way. Go to the attic, my old one. Everything you need to know is there." I stared at it, cold realization creeping over me. Grace. He had suspected her. The next morning I drove to the old house again. The sun was barely rising, a pale gold bleeding through gray clouds. I parked a block away, afraid she'd see my car. The back door still had the same loose lock I'd known for years. Daniel used to say he'd fix it someday. I slipped inside quietly. The house smelled like new perfume and expensive candles, not like Daniel at all. I crept up the staircase, every step a prayer she wasn't home. When I reached the attic, dust floated in the slanted morning light. Everything looked just as he'd left it. Boxes, paint cans, the old wooden desk near the window. I searched for an hour before I saw it. A false panel behind the desk. Daniel had built it himself years ago. My fingers found the latch, and with a faint click, the panel came loose. Inside was a folder, thick, neatly bound, labeled Ellis Construction Holdings. I frowned. That was Daniel's company, the one he built from scratch. Grace had told me he left it entirely to her in his will. But when I opened the folder, I found documents showing something very different. Half of the company shares were still in my name. Transferred to me 5 years ago. Quietly, legally, witnessed by Mr. Lawrence. And there, stapled to the last page, was a handwritten note. "Mom, this is yours. If something happens to me, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. You earned this. You raised me, taught me, stood by me. Grace wouldn't understand loyalty, but you do. Protect what's ours." My breath caught. I felt the attic spinning, my knees weak. For months, I'd believed I had nothing. Grace had let me leave that house with nothing but a few boxes and a bruised heart, while she paraded around as the grieving widow, cashing checks and throwing dinner parties. But Daniel, my Daniel had seen it all coming. And suddenly, I wasn't powerless anymore. That evening I met Mr. Lawrence again. I laid the documents on his desk, my voice trembling between fury and disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" He sighed. "Daniel asked me not to, unless you found it yourself. He wanted you to know when you were ready." Ready for what? For the fight. Those words echoed like thunder. He explained everything. How Daniel had suspected Grace of siphoning company funds into her own accounts. How he'd quietly restructured the company so that half its assets would revert to me in the event of his death. Grace thought she owned it all, but she didn't. Legally, half of Ellis Construction was still mine. A slow, sharp calm washed over me. I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was a business owner, one who had just been robbed, lied to, and humiliated. Mr. Lawrence looked at me carefully. "Do you want to challenge the will publicly?" I shook my head. "No, not yet. Grace thrives on spectacle. I want her to think she's won." He nodded approvingly. "Then what do you plan to do?" I looked at Daniel's signature at the bottom of the document, and a small smile crept to my lips. "I'm going to remind her who taught my son how to fight." A week later, I showed up at one of Grace's charity events. She was hosting a lavish dinner downtown, surrounded by reporters and small-town socialites, her new diamond earrings catching every flash. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a second. "Eleanor, what a surprise." I smiled back, all grace and poise. "I heard you were celebrating the company's expansion. Thought I'd see how my half is doing." The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, I'm sure your lawyer can explain it better," I said lightly, sipping from the champagne flute a waiter had just handed me. "It's all in the paperwork Daniel left. Seems he wanted me involved after all." For the first time, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Panic. I didn't need to raise my voice or cause a scene. I just let the silence stretch between us until she couldn't bear it. And then I turned and walked away, every click of my heels echoing through the marble hall. She wanted to play a game of power. She'd just learned the first rule. Never underestimate a woman who's already lost everything. The morning after the charity dinner, Grace's perfect world began to tremble. At 8 a.m. she called my phone, the first time since she'd thrown me out of that house. Her voice was tight. "Eleanor, what was that stunt last night?" Kept my tone calm, measured. "I don't know what you mean, dear. I just congratulated you on the company expansion." "You're lying," she hissed. "You're bluffing. Daniel left everything to me." "Did he?" I said softly. "Maybe you should double-check the paperwork before you embarrass yourself further." Then I hung up. For the first time in months, I smiled. By the end of the week, I received an email from the company accountant. Subject line: "Urgent, ownership verification." He had copied Grace. He wanted confirmation of the transfer Daniel had made 5 years ago, the one giving me half the shares. I simply replied, attaching the documents from the attic. No threats, no anger. Just proof. That single email sent Grace's empire into chaos. Grace called an emergency board meeting the next morning. She thought she could silence me, corner me, humiliate me again. But when I walked into that sleek glass conference room wearing Daniel's favorite navy coat, the one he used to call my battle armor, the looks on everyone's faces told me everything I needed to know. They respected me. They remembered me. I had been at Daniel's side when he built this company. I was there for every late-night coffee, every budget panic, every blueprint spread across our kitchen table. Grace wasn't family to them. She was a woman who showed up after the work was done. She started talking fast, her voice sharp. "There's been a misunderstanding. Daniel's will clearly states." I interrupted her gently, placing the folder on the table. "Actually, Grace, there's no misunderstanding. Daniel's separate legal documents indicate I am a 50% shareholder. You can confirm with Mr. Lawrence." The accountant nodded. He already did. "The paperwork checks out." Grace's voice cracked. "That's impossible. She's manipulating this." I leaned forward. "Grace, don't accuse me of deceit. You're standing in the company my son and I built from scratch, and you've been siphoning money to fund your little lifestyle." Gasps around the table. Her eyes went wide. "You can't prove that." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I can. And I will. But I'd rather not drag Daniel's name through the mud." She froze because she knew I meant it. "Here's what I want," I continued. You'll remain on the board for now. But all financial activity will pass through my approval. You'll return every cent of the company's money you took for personal use. Quietly. No police. No press. She clenched her fists. And if I don't? I stood gathering my papers. Then I'll do what you never expected. I'll fight back. Gracefully. That night she showed up at my apartment. The same woman who once tossed me out of my own home now stood in front of me. Desperate, shaking. Her mascara streaked down her face. What do you want from me, Eleanor? Money. Respect. What is this? I studied her carefully. For the first time I saw fear. Not the angry kind, the hollow, childlike kind. You took my son's house. You mocked my grief. You made me feel like a ghost in my own life, I said quietly. And still I didn't hate you. Pitied you. Because one day, I knew Daniel's truth would speak louder than your lies. She sank into a chair, trembling. You're destroying me. No, Grace, I whispered. You destroyed yourself when you mistook kindness for weakness. I let her sit there for a moment, her sobs echoing through the small apartment. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the way she told me to stop visiting my son's grave. And pity turned to resolve again. Over the next few weeks, the tide turned. Grace's social circle, the same people who once flattered her, began to distance themselves. Whispers spread that she had mismanaged the company funds. The local paper even ran a story. Ellis Construction's widow faces audit. I didn't leak it. Someone inside the company must have. But I didn't stop it either. When she called me, screaming that I'd ruined her reputation, I simply said, I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped protecting what was already cracking. Her silence on the other end was deafening. One evening I went back to Daniel's grave. The lilies had wilted, and I replaced them with fresh ones. The air smelled like rain and redemption. I'm doing it, sweetheart, I whispered. I'm making it right. But not for revenge, for you. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. A small jewelry box, my old one, sitting on the headstone. Inside, a note in Grace's handwriting. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to love him the way you did. I stood there in the dim light for a long time, the sound of crickets filling the silence. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. But I didn't need her apology anymore. Because for the first time since Daniel's death, I finally felt at peace. That peace, however, was short-lived. 2 weeks later, Mr. Lawrence called me again. Eleanor, he said gravely, there's something you need to see. Grace has filed a new motion. She's trying to challenge the ownership in court. I smiled slowly. Then let her try. Because what Grace didn't know was that Daniel had left one more secret. One that would shatter her final illusion of control. And I was ready to use it. The moment Mr. Lawrence said Grace had filed a motion, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not anger. Just clarity. I played gently long enough. It was time to end this. Not with rage, but with truth. 2 days later, I met Mr. Lawrence in his office. Rain streaked down the windows, the kind of storm that rattled the glass and blurred the skyline. He looked uneasy as I sat across from him. There's one last thing Daniel left, he said quietly. He told me to hold on to it until the day Grace challenged you. My pulse quickened. What is it? He pulled a small black flash drive from his drawer, identical to the one I found in Daniel's attic box. Your son recorded something a few days before the accident. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. An accident. He hesitated. Mrs. Ellis, we never found solid proof of foul play. But Daniel asked me to give you this if anything ever looked suspicious. He plugged the drive into his computer. Static. Then Daniel's voice. Warm, familiar, trembling just slightly. Mom, if you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. Grace has been asking questions about the company, about my insurance, about my will. I've confronted her, but she keeps deflecting. If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. Look deeper. And Mom, promise me one thing. Don't let her win by becoming like her. Be smarter. Quieter. I love you. My hands went cold. I had to grip the edge of the desk to stay steady. Is this time-stamped? I whispered. Mr. Lawrence nodded. Yes. 2 days before his car crash. I closed my eyes, the sound of rain drowning everything else. Grace had always said it was a wet road. That the police had ruled it an accident. That Daniel must have fallen asleep at the wheel. But now I couldn't stop hearing his voice. The fear in it. The final plea, don't let her win. The moment Mr. Lawrence said Grace had filed a motion, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not anger. Just clarity. I played gently long enough. It was time to end this. Not with rage, but with truth. 2 days later, I met Mr. Lawrence in his office. Rain streaked down the windows, the kind of storm that rattled the glass and blurred the skyline. He looked uneasy as I sat across from him. There's one last thing Daniel left, he said quietly. He told me to hold on to it until the day Grace challenged you. My pulse quickened. What is it? He pulled a small black flash drive from his drawer, identical to the one I found in Daniel's attic box. Your son recorded something a few days before the accident. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. An accident. He hesitated. Mrs. Ellis, we never found solid proof of foul play. But Daniel asked me to give you this if anything ever looked suspicious. He plugged the drive into his computer. Static. Then Daniel's voice. Warm, familiar, trembling just slightly. Mom, if you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. Grace has been asking questions about the company, about my insurance, about my will. I've confronted her, but she keeps deflecting. If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. Look deeper. And Mom, promise me one thing. Don't let her win by becoming like her. Be smarter. Quieter. I love you. My hands went cold. I had to grip the edge of the desk to stay steady. Is this time-stamped? I whispered. Mr. Lawrence nodded. Yes. 2 days before his car crash. I closed my eyes, the sound of rain drowning everything else. Grace had always said it was a wet road. That the police had ruled it an accident. That Daniel must have fallen asleep at the wheel. But now I couldn't stop hearing his voice. The fear in it. The final plea, don't let her win. I left the office shaking. By the time I reached home, my grief had turned to ice. I didn't call Grace. I didn't threaten her. I just began to plan. For days, I reviewed every piece of paper Daniel left behind. Insurance policies, emails, contracts, even his old messages. He had always been organized, almost obsessively so. That's when I found something odd. A series of automatic transfers made months before his death, each one small but consistent. Thousands quietly moved into a secondary account under Grace's name. And one memo note attached to a payment. Personal reimbursement, vehicle. My breath caught. I traced the date. The very day Daniel's car had gone into the shop. Grace had taken care of the service appointment. She'd told me that herself. I forwarded everything to Mr. Lawrence and asked him to verify it discreetly. Few days later he called me back. Eleanor, he said. That account, it's linked to a mechanic in the next county. Cash payments. No record of work done. Whatever she paid for, it wasn't maintenance. The air left my lungs. It's strange how silence feels different once the storm passes. The first few weeks after Grace's disappearance were quiet in a way that wasn't lonely anymore. The phone stopped ringing with lawyers and board members. The local gossip shifted from whispers about poor Eleanor to stories of What really happened to Daniel's widow? I didn't feed the rumors. I didn't have to. Truth has a way of walking through town on its own. I started spending my mornings at the construction office again. Not because I wanted to rebuild Daniel's empire, but because I wanted to remember him there. In the sound of blueprint paper, the smell of fresh wood, the way the employees smiled when they saw me walk in. "Mrs. Ellis," one of the young engineers said one day, "the place feels right again now that you're here." I smiled softly. "Thank you, honey. Let's make Daniel proud." That was all I wanted now. Not revenge, not recognition, just the quiet dignity of finishing what my son started. A month later I received a letter. No return address, just my name written in an unfamiliar hand. Inside a short note. "I'm leaving town for good. I've sold the last of my things. I know you think I don't deserve forgiveness, and maybe I don't. But I did love him in my own way. I just didn't know how. Please don't hate me forever. Grace." For a long time I stared at that note. And to my surprise, I didn't feel hatred. Felt pity. For a woman who had everything she thought she wanted, but never understood the one thing that mattered. I folded the letter and placed it inside Daniel's favorite book, The Old Man and the Sea. He always said that story was about fighting the current, about losing things that were never really yours to keep. Grace had lost everything because she fought for what was never meant for her. One spring morning I visited the old house again. The realtor was there, showing it to a young couple with 2 kids chasing each other on the lawn. They waved at me politely, not knowing who I was. And I smiled because that's exactly how it should be. That house deserved laughter again. I walked around the back to the rose garden Daniel and I planted years ago. Most of the roses were wilted, but one, a deep red bloom, had survived the winter. I knelt down and whispered, "You always did like the stubborn ones, didn't you, Daniel?" As I stood to leave, I heard my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, calling from across the street. "Eleanor! Lord, I haven't seen you smile like that in years." I laughed softly. Maybe I finally remembered how. She came closer, lowering her voice. "People still talk about Grace, you know. Say she ran off to California. Changed her name. No one's seen her since." Shrugged. "Then let her be a ghost. Some stories don't need an ending." And that was the truth. I didn't want vengeance to define my life. Love had already done that. That night, I sat on my porch as the wind carried the smell of fresh rain. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed. The same sound Daniel used to listen to from his bedroom as a child. For the first time I didn't cry when I thought of him. Smiled. Because I could feel him there. In the wind, in the stars, in every quiet corner of the life we built together. He'd always said, "Mom, you're stronger than you think." And now I finally believed him. I used to think revenge had to be loud, dramatic, fiery, something that burned bright enough to be seen by everyone who doubted you. But real revenge, the kind that satisfies the soul, is calm and steady. It's when you live well, even after someone tried to destroy everything that made you whole. After Grace's letter, something inside me shifted. I stopped surviving and started living. That winter, I turned the old Ellis construction office into something new. Something that would carry Daniel's name, not Grace's shame. Foundation. The Daniel Ellis Home Foundation, dedicated to building affordable housing for young widows and single mothers. Because if life had taught me anything, it was that losing a man shouldn't mean losing your home. People called it poetic, I called it healing. When the local paper came to interview me, the reporter asked, "Mrs. Ellis, what made you start this?" I smiled at the camera and said, "Because grief doesn't end when people stop bringing casseroles. It ends when we find purpose again." The story spread. Donations came in. Old clients, even some of Grace's former friends, offered support. I didn't ask why. I just knew Daniel would have been proud. Then one day I got a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Ellis?" "Yes." "Was This is Linda Cooper from Santa Fe Women's Shelter. We just wanted to thank you for the donation your foundation sent. A woman checked in here a few weeks ago. Her name was Grace Thompson. She's doing better. She said you'd understand. I felt the air leave my lungs. Grace Thompson, she'd taken back her maiden name. She was alive, starting over. And somewhere deep down I hoped she would find peace too. Tell her. I hesitated, then smiled softly into the phone. Tell her I said, do better this time. Later that week, I visited Daniel's grave. The air was cool, soft sunlight breaking through the clouds. I think we're okay now, sweetheart, I whispered. You can rest easy. I knelt down and brushed the leaves off his name, tracing the letters gently. She's gone. But somehow, I don't hate her anymore. Isn't that strange? The wind picked up, a soft gust that carried the scent of roses. Felt like an answer. That night I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of tea in hand, and looked through old photographs. Daniel at graduation, Grace on their wedding day, the three of us in front of the house. For the first time I didn't see loss. Saw life. Messy, flawed, beautiful life. I realized something then. Grace had thought I was weak because I didn't scream or fight back in the ways she understood. But she never learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it endures. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is outlive her pain with grace. And I had done exactly that. The next morning I found myself humming while cooking breakfast, something I hadn't done in years. Outside, kids were playing on the street. My neighbor's dog barked. Life moved on. And I did too. The house, my house, stayed. The love stayed. The legacy stayed. Grace was gone, but Daniel's name, my strength, and our story remained. Sometimes when the house settles at night, I can still hear Daniel's laugh echo through the hallway, faint like a memory the walls refuse to let go of. I used to think those echoes would break me. Now they comfort me, because they remind me that love doesn't disappear, it transforms. And so does pain. When people in town look at me now, they don't see the grieving mother who was thrown out of her own home. They see a woman who lost everything and built something stronger from the ruins. They ask me how I did it, how I kept my dignity when my world fell apart. And I always say the same thing. I didn't fight to destroy her. I fought to remember me. Grace's betrayal could have turned me bitter. But bitterness is just another kind of prison, one you build for yourself. Instead I chose peace. And peace turned out to be the most powerful revenge of all. Every Sunday morning I still bake blueberry muffins. Daniel's favorite. I leave one on the windowsill just because. Old habits die gently. Sometimes the neighborhood kids stop by. They call me Miss Ellie now, their voices full of joy. They don't know my past, they just know my kindness. And that's enough. Last week, a young woman came to my office. Barely 25, her eyes swollen from crying. She said she'd lost her husband in an accident, and her in-laws were threatening to take her house. I held her hand and said softly, "Honey, let me tell you something. You can lose everything, money, family, love, but don't ever lose yourself. Because the moment you remember who you are, no one can take that from you again." She cried, hugged her, and I knew right then that Daniel's legacy was alive. Not in buildings, not in bank accounts, but in healing others. As for Grace, I don't know where she is now. Sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks about what she did, about the woman she called weak. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. But either way, I've made peace with her ghost. Because forgiveness isn't about freeing the other person. It's about freeing yourself. And I've finally done that. That night I sat on my porch watching the stars. The air was still warm. I whispered into the dark, "Daniel, I'm proud of you. And I think you'd be proud of me too." A breeze passed, soft, familiar, kind. And I swear I heard his voice in it saying, "Always, Mom." I smiled through my tears. The world kept turning. And for the first time in years, my heart was light. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever been pushed out, forgotten, or underestimated, remember this. They can take your comfort but not your character. They can silence your voice but not your truth. They can call you weak, until they see the quiet strength it takes to survive what they couldn't. You don't have to shout to prove your power. Sometimes the most graceful revenge is simply living beautifully after the storm. Because when all the noise fades, the one who stands in peace wins.
If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen play out?